Okay, recording, which is excellent. Well, it's one of these wonderfully weird interviews where the subject only came into my knowledge about 3 days ago. And I had to confess complete ignorance in the last 48 hours until this gentleman got in touch and graciously agreed to be another interviewee. Mr. Don Mayne, welcome to the Collective.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a very interesting few days. It's fairly early here in the evening in Ipswich on a Monday night, and Mr. Mayne has kindly agreed to get up at the almighty weird hour of 4 o'clock in the morning.
4 a.m.
So we thank you for going the extra 100 miles.
Not a problem at all.
For this. But it was very interesting because obviously I came and saw you when you were doing the Australian collective with Sam and Chris and Barry and all the rest of them, and haven't yet managed to watch the full edition. I've tinkered with the beginning, but you are an accredited Salvationist composer with entries in both the Arthur Gullidge series and the Noel Jones series. And so as always, as a composer of Salvation Army music, do you have a Salvation Army background? What's your musical heritage, so to speak?
Good question. Yes, I do. My parents started going to the Salvos after they were married, so that was 1968. So I have 4 older sisters, no brothers. So, so we all, I'm lucky in some ways. They all learnt an instrument at the corps, and there was a guy there called Frank Whitecross who was the bandmaster at the time, and he was bandmaster for I think 26, 27 years. It was massive tenure. And then I sort of around the house I actually learned drums first. And then when I was a little kid, and then my dad taught me, and then started picking up my sister's instruments and playing tenor horns and stuff around the house. And this guy Frank decided I should learn, and so about 5 I started learning cornet, and unfortunately they didn't let me go through the rest of the band. I sort of stuck on cornet, and and then as the years progressed, through my sort of childhood into teenage years, learnt the rest. So I learnt trombone at school. Actually, learnt some trombone. Taught myself piano, and that sort of led to another career, which we'll get to probably later. So I grew up doing the salvos, doing that. Played cornet in the band. Started on second, and obviously went up to solo as I got older, and then played some piano in the worship band, and a few other things along the way. And then went to Adelaide, the uni, and then, got a degree, and the rest was history, and played in some stuff over there. And now I'm back in Mildura, where I was born. For those who don't know where Mildura is, which is probably most of the world, we're about, I'll give you a geographical idea of Australia. We're 4 hours east of Adelaide, 6 hours northwest of Melbourne, 10 hours west of Sydney, and about 2 days of driving southwest of Brisbane. So, it's I travel
nowhere by the sounds of it.
Yeah, pretty much. 10 minutes away from my house is bushland. It's what we call in Australia scrub.
Yep.
And the picture behind me on my thing is actually of the local area here. That's actually the Murray River, which is at sunset. So I get to see that every night. I go for walks down the river, and yes, it's quite a journey.
So with this type of conversation is all about your musical heritage and you as a composer. So I'd like to sort of know, when did you discover that composition and putting notes on paper that other people could read outside of the family unit that would make sense as maybe a quartet or a solo was something that you could do outside of the fun environment of the family making music in their own funny, jolly way?
Good question. I guess when I was at early high school, so because I learned early, I actually went through a system at school where, in primary school at least, I was the only probably brass woodwind person at my school. So I got to hang out with secondary school kids when I was really young in music fest things. We have this big district band which had like 120 people in it. So from that, we sort of got the opportunity to learn how to improvise a little bit and learn how to sort of read music and do the theory. And I did all the academic study. But I was probably about 12, 13 when I started writing just melodies. I actually started transcribing. So I would hear a recording. I'd sort of like the idea, and then I'd write sort of the best I could, or try and write what was on the page, or what I heard onto the page. And then from that sort of came sort of the idea then that I could hear what I wanted. So then probably, I reckon 13, 14, I wrote some pretty atrocious band music, and took it into the corps, and they let me conduct it and play it and sort of hear it. It wasn't all bad, but it wasn't all good either. Like it was, as you do when you first start. And then that sort of, once I went to uni, and I did a jazz degree at uni, a Bachelor of Music in Jazz Performance. We did arranging classes and that as academic studies. So by that point, I'd already been arranging a little bit for small ensemble stuff at work, school at the time, and a couple of little show things that we did locally. And then, went to uni and started writing. It's actually a bit of a weird story, but I went to a Salvo corps in Adelaide, which didn't have a brass band at all. We had a contemporary group with brass backing, so sort of like a praise band, funk band sort of thing. And from that, I started writing some charts for them at Teacher Galley. So there was two people there. Diane Littlechild was the musical director sort of person. And some corps officers, or the son of a corps officer that we had in Mildura was the officer there. So I started writing for them, and then we thought we'd start a little big band thing. So we had like an 8-piece brass with rhythm section and singers. Started writing for that, and that sort of took off. And then, uni as well, and then sort of the rest has sort of happened since then. So, yeah.
So it's interesting that you've had a very long, I mean, in a sense that you've been writing and experimenting since a very young age. And I think every composer will always say that the mark between writing the piece and if the piece gets published could be 20, 30 years, or you could be lucky with a few months. And when I was doing the exploratory with you, and when you agree, I immediately it's all 2017 Risen, followed a couple, just by last year by Our God and King. And I was fascinated that, who are your sort of, when you started writing for the local brass band and the local corps band, and sort of trying to say, okay, do I write the jazz or do I write, other styles? Was there anyone in the army world that sort of you crossed paths with and was kind of you'd consider a sort of a mentor or person that sort of helped you settle down and work out how to strengthen yourself in a musical way?
Yeah, it's sort of weird. Like I think most of my early Salvation Army, or at least Salvation Army, but professional career as well, I guess, as a player and writer. I come from a town whose population's now it's about 70,000, but back then it was probably about 38, 40,000 when I was a kid. Like it's not a lot of people. So I didn't really have a lot of time with people here. There's a couple of guys, like there was a guy that was taking the local town band when I was at school called Steve Packer. He now takes Mitcham City in Adelaide band, and which is great because I can take my music to them and sort of test it and stuff. They let me do that, or we've at least talked about it. But he was from the Navy, so he sort of took a little bit of an interest in my playing and my career that way. I had a ex-national champion euphonium soloist who was my trumpet teacher. So he sort of took an interest in that. But but really there was a guy at the core, apart from Frank, who sort of taught me. There was a guy at the core called Graham Moyle, who ended up becoming the bandmaster after Frank. And he was sort of an arranger. He sort of helped me a little bit work out basic 4-part harmony and all that sort of stuff, especially when I was studying. But then it wasn't really to uni that, people sort of took an interest in my writing a little bit. And for me, probably the big thing was after uni, I learnt, I was saying to you the other night, but it's a bit of a weird story, but I met Bill Broughton at the Spiritual of the Bone tour in 2000 and I want to say 2, somewhere around there. And a friend of mine or mutual friend of ours, Howard Raymond, had sort of said to me, you need to meet this guy. And then the next year he moved to Adelaide to get a job at the uni and stuff. And from there, it became this mentorship thing with him and a friendship. And that went to unfortunately his passing last year, which was 12 months yesterday.
Okay.
And it was, just his knowledge, his wisdom, his guidance. He was one of those guys who had a wealth of knowledge, but wanted to encourage you as a person.
Yeah.
So I was lucky to have him, as I say, blessed. I'm not really a luck person, but blessed to have him in my life. And then moving out of that time, once I got into the big band, so I played in the Salvo big band in Melbourne. I'd met Brian Hogg like early 2000s he come up to Mildura to do a workshop thing, and Noel Jones I'd met probably even before that, but we didn't really connect. I was really young. So once I started playing in the big band, Brian was another person who was really influential in listening to my stuff and being critical. I think when you start writing, you need to have a critical friend. You need to have someone who's or a mentor who's willing to say that's not good, or that's good but it can be better. Which is both Brian and Bill's strength. They were and even Noel now, like we were talking the other night, but Noel is a massive encourager of young guys, and I had the wisdom last year of him sitting down with some charts that are getting published this year, 2 charts that are getting published, and he just was like, oh, I like it. And I'm like, well, can you give me some feedback? And he did, but at the same time, it was encouraging. Keep on going, keep on doing this, and so those guys have done it. And obviously, Sam now we're mates, and Sam Creamer and I, and we're the same. We send stuff to each other all the time, and chat and talk music. So there's been a few, but I'm a bit of a sponge. Like at uni, there's a guy called Hal Hall who was our big band director. He exposed to us the difference between writing like Ellington and writing like Basie, or writing like Sammy Nestico in the jazz idiom. I started, looking at scores. I still do look at scores from Eric Ball and Ray Stedman Allen and all those guys, and study scores. And that's what you learn. You learn basically how to do it from wisdom from people. So,
was there a danger that, I mean, as you say, you had this sort of professional degree in the jazz idiom. I would guess that jazzes can be as far removed from the traditional Salvation Army sound as you could get, and that's not a discredit. I think it's just the way it evolved. So obviously you've got this kind of evolutionary bud that you've had this formal and very deep and centered training in the jazz idiom, and you can also. How do you kind of control the differentiation? Because sometimes to me it feels like it's 2 ends of the football pitch. That's the jazz end, that's the Salvation Army end. Whereas jazz has a lot of flower and colour. In an army event, it's going to be a controlled matrix, maybe with a harmony. You could be writing for the Melbourne Staff Band, who, like most Salvation, can probably play anything you throw at them. But the structure could be different. How do you cope with that as a composer?
I guess I'll take a backward step before I come forward. So I grew up playing classical trumpet when I got to high school. So in Victoria, where I'm from the state of Victoria, our end of year 12 exam is a 25-minute recital, and it's off a prescribed list. So I learnt all the classical theory up to grade 5 or 6 AME-B, which is our Australian equivalent of Trinity, I guess, which you guys have in London. And so I learnt up to grade 5 or 6 theory, grade 7 or 8 trumpet, classical and then did jazz at uni. So I come from both worlds, sort of, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to uni, jazz was sort of the option because I just wanted to do something different, I guess. And I had a love for jazz. I sort of got exposed to Louis Armstrong and James Morrison. That's sort of the two trumpet guys at the time. I guess that sort of gave me some background. Oh, and I should add then the corps that I'm still at now, but back in Mildura. But when I was growing up, it was very traditional. We had a big full-size brass band, songster brigade, timbrels, which are one of my favourite instruments in the world. But we had those sort of things.
About timbrel as an instrument?
No, that's a joke. I'm not a fan of a timbrel. Yeah, they love it. Like, good on them. But look, it's a entertainment. It's a factor for public, but not for me. But yeah, so I grew up with that sort of legacy, I guess. And then the jazz thing's interesting. Like, a lot of people think that jazz is sort of ad hoc and you just do what you want. There's actually quite a few rules to it. Like, if you actually get down to the nitty gritty of jazz, it's about communication, just like any other style of music. Yeah. It's about call and response. It's about talking to each other, not talking over people on the stage in a musical sense. So you've got to sort of, you've got to be a little bit more constrained than people think jazz is. And I think if you apply that sort of knowledge to writing as well, there's the old KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. That's the same with any style, and it's something that I think as a composer, and actually we chatted a little bit about this the other day on the conversation that Sam hosted. You can get to the point where you so want to hear the colours of the chords that it becomes muddy and it becomes a little out there. And I think the Salvation Army has always been a little different in the way they do music. In a lot of ways, like I think of the Gowans and Larson stuff as being pretty, for the time when it was written, pretty revolutionary, in the way it sounded. It was a bit different. And I guess hearing the original music of the Salvation Army when it was, forming would have been quite revolutionary for people at that time. So I think we've sort of forgotten a little bit that we are sometimes cutting edge when it comes to music. And I think the big thing for me is that we can't fear trying new stuff. Like, for me as a jazz musician, for instance, every time I jump on the stage is different. Every time I play with my quartet or a big band, like in Australia, we've got sort of two salvo big bands. So we've got one in Melbourne, which is sort of based out of THQ, which is now called the Salvo Big Band. Originally it was called THQ's Big Band, or, whatever it was called back in 2010. And then Sam's got Revelation up in Queensland, Revelation Big Band. So I've played with both bands as a soloist and as a player, and they're very different bands, very different. Yeah. And so how I approach the Melbourne Big Band and how I approach the Queensland one is completely different. How I would write for those guys can be completely different in the style. So I think we just need to be aware as composers that we can't be afraid to put new stuff up there for bands to try, and bands need not be afraid of trying them and failing. One of the things about swing charts with jazz, I never wanted to write swing brass band music. And the reason for it probably is 99% of brass bands struggle with swing as a style. You need a good drummer. You need a good sort of idea of what's going on. You need to listen to that music a lot to get the feel. Yeah. So, I was sort of like, I want to write for swing. And then having chats with Sam and with Barry and Brian, suddenly it's like,
the kings of swing.
We've got this idiom, we've got a legacy. And I write a heap for the Salvo Big Band in Melbourne. So suddenly it was like the chart that's coming out this year, Because He Lives, I've done an arrangement of Because He Lives. That's literally a transcription off the big band, but it's squashed down to a Gulledge series. So that was written, I think 2011 for the big band, 2012 maybe for the big band. It's taken 8 years really to get that to the point where I'm ready for it to be, or was ready to be published. I'd sort of done it, and then we left it alone for a little while, done other stuff, and come back. So that's sort of the first swing thing that's going to be published by me, which is ironic because I've been playing jazz for 20 something years. But at the same time, I wanted to explore the other areas of music that I don't usually get to play much now, which is that traditional sound. So I sort of am writing more swing stuff now because of the people that I'm hanging around, your Sams and your Brians and your
need, and for the people that are there that you're playing with. That's what the structure of the group is. Are you a Sibelius finale user, or do you
definitely Sibelius. Definitely Sibelius. I was trained when I first started working at my school that I work at, which is Redcliffe Secondary College. So shout out to all those guys on holidays at the moment. When I first started working,
asleep.
Yeah, they're all asleep. They'll get the video later. When I first started working there, we were a Soundhouse school, which is it was like an alliance of a whole lot of schools around the world. And they were big Sibelius users. And so I think I used it at uni. So 1.3, I think I started using, or 1.4 at uni. And then I'm now, I'm a subscriber to Avid. I use Pro Tools in my studio and Cubase in my studio. So I use Sibelius every day. It's on my laptop. It's on my studio computer. It's on my work computer. I've got the iPad app that reads the scores.
Did you not do pen and paper if you're away from it? Or is it a case of, I can just, open up the nearest gadget and da-da-da-da-da?
Both. I have manuscript pads all over my house. I have one in the car. I have one at work. I have a wad of paper at work, of music paper, because I have to give it to kids usually as well. So I travel a lot. I mentioned where I live and where I come from. I do a trip to Melbourne at least once a month for the big band, and that's a 600-kilometre drive. So that's, what's that, 372 miles of driving, which I often do after work on a Friday and then come back on Saturday ready for church. So, in a weekend I could drive 1,200 Ks or nearly 700 miles. So it's huge. And so I in my car I have manuscript paper in the sort of back console. So when I have a break I might write something down. I use voice memo on my phone. Because I've got the touch hands free. So I can be driving down the road and start singing something into my phone, which was cool. I still use pen and paper. I actually think it's really important to still write music on paper. Like, it's, even though I'm a sort of younger generation guy, I still think it's important that you learn to write and at least be half legible in what you're trying to write, because there's times when you need to. There's times when you are out somewhere and you need to write down something quickly to play, or get someone else to play. So yeah, I still write, but I have all my Sibelius has got shortcuts off my computer. I'm a bit of a nerd. I've made like, key shifts and stuff, to make my job a little easier, or quicker. And I have templates set up for at least most of sketching, for most of the things I do, orchestral, concert band, jazz, big band stuff. They're all sketched out. But because I'm sort of in my studio a lot recording, I just use Sibelius on the fly. And then if I'm really desperate, I'll use paper.
But one of the things that's interesting is, given that your output has to be tailored to a lot of different groups and styles, how do you have to lock yourself away when you're doing composing? Because we get Spotify and YouTube and iTunes and all the rest of it, the radio, TV, the web, all the rest of it. You don't want to end up hang on, that's a James Morrison clone, that's the jingle off the radio. How do you maintain the originality? How do you try to sort of go, okay, this needs to be original and fresh?
Yeah, it's I think I've just got used to. I'm used to noise. like I fly when I'm not driving. I fly everywhere, right? Like a twin prop near your ear when you're flying is this constant.
I'm just
buzz.
hoping you were talking about an aeroplane there, and you weren't nicking Superman's cape.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm not getting off the ground as Superman. I'll tell you that much. But with those engines and stuff and noise, you sort of get used to just white noise, as they call it. I will lock myself away. Like one of the reasons why I'm sort of as perky as I am at 4 o'clock in the morning is often in my holidays, which I'm on now, I'm up at 4 o'clock in the morning writing because it's the best time for me to write. Like I get home from pre-COVID. This is at the moment I'm not going anywhere, but pre-COVID, I'd get home from a rehearsal at maybe 10:30 at night and have to do edits for a show or whatever. So I write locally. I'm writing for musicals and scout shows and sort of things like that, or edits. So I would have to I'd have to come home and do edits really late at night. So this time of the day is perfect for it because nothing's up. There's no traffic outside. Or minimal traffic. The train that I live near a train line that doesn't roar past at 4:30 in the morning usually. So you do that. I guess as far as the copying stuff is, and I would relate it this way, I guess, is that we all speak a language. Now in our case, we're speaking English, obviously, but we all speak a language and we all use a collection of words in those sentences, and we hear those sentences from birth to now, and that's how we form our understanding of language. But we all have different accents. We all have different ways of pronouncing words. There's a joke in Australia about you can tell if we're South Australian or Victorian by saying chance or chance, dance or dance.
Tomato,
that's actually
potato.
Yeah, that's a thing in Australia, and it probably is in England as well, where you go from.
You can tell a northerner from a southerner just as easy.
Yeah, so we have those different quirks. I don't necessarily think sounding like someone is a bad thing in your writing, as long as you have your own original things that happen there. In jazz, there is a language that we use. The dots, the doots, the do bars, everything. The way we articulate the notes or write down the notes with dots and dashes. There's a standard way of doing that, a standard language, and then from that you sort of get the way you say it. So I think we all have Howard Davies said it really well one day about DNA. He said, every song's got its DNA structure.
Yeah.
And I think, and we spoke about that the other day on the talk with Sam and that as well. But I think to expand on that, every person has their own DNA in their song. Like, there used to be I remember playing a lot of Noel Jones music when I was growing up. For some reason, our band loved Noel Jones music. Why wouldn't you? It's great.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine.
Yeah, but there's certain little things in Noel Jones's music that you'd hear in every piece. Like you hear a line or a chord sequence or whatever. And I think we all have that. I know Brian Hogg's music, for instance, is really asymmetrical in some ways that it doesn't. Or is it asymmetrical? The one where it's got different time signatures and stuff. It's not straight 4/4 all the time. And I love that about it. It's different. It's quirky. And I know when I'm handing him a piece of music, if there's an opportunity to chuck a 5/4 bar in or a 3/4 over 6/8 or something, it's there. It's like, why don't you do this? Sam has a way of writing swing music for brass band, which works, and for me, like I've only really got into brass band writing again in the last few years, which is why the publications are where they are. I actually walked away from, didn't walk away from church, but I walked away from the brass band idiom for probably 10 years because I didn't play in one. Once I went to uni, the church band was a contemporary band. I'd spent 5 years at uni. When I came back to Mildura to teach, I sort of got handed the baton after a while to run the band, and that would become a Sunday morning thing because of the age of the players and stuff. And now, sadly, we've lost our band due to health and age and things. So I never really had the desire to write brass band music because I was writing a whole lot of other stuff.
It wasn't the realism that you faced, was it? It was
the
day-to-day thing was, you had to write for what was accessible, and I think all composers particularly the ones I've interviewed, have all said that it's very lovely to have this ability and the invitation to write for Sydney Opera House, Carnegie Hall, the Royal Albert Hall. But
Yeah.
at the same time, your basic thing is, you know what? I can write down a piece of music. I'm doing this hymn setting for the local band, and it will get used. And it's a
Yeah.
functional, and it's not just gathering dust. A piece of music gathering on dust on the shelf
Yeah.
is not much use.
Well, it was interesting. When I first sort of started getting back into it, I was doing a show. We do Gang Show in Mildura, which is a scout show. It was started in London by Ralph Reeder many, many years ago, probably 100 years ago. And they did an item of a song called Once We Were Kings, which is out of Billy Elliot. Mm-hmm. And the brief that I got as musical director and composer was, we want a traditional brass band English sound. And I was like, oh, yeah, sure, whatever. And they gave me the piano score, and they said, there it is, go away. And I sort of had to develop this arrangement from that. And so I ended up, by this point, we were recording backing tracks. We started doing backing tracks rather than live band. So I had to sit at home and record this 25-piece brass band thing that I'd written. And, you know, it's a pretty good way of learning how things work on an instrument. Like, I had to start at sop and work all the way down to sort of B-flat tuba, you know, and that's what I did. So as I was putting the parts in, I was going, that just doesn't work. Like, that doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like a trombone part that would work. So that was a really good eye-opening experience for me, because as I was recording it, I was rewriting or editing, I guess, the score. So that was sort of when I got back into it a little bit. And I happened to be in Melbourne doing a big band gig, and I was at Brian Hogg's house. And I sort of said, I've got some ideas for some pieces, and sort of showed him a few things. And he was really gracious to sit there and edit them with me on the computer and say, look, you know, try this and try that. And that sort of reignited that passion for writing brass bands. And then even though we don't have a band here, 2016, I think it was, I got this random email from South Korea, and they were wanting me to write they'd heard some big band stuff that I did, and I think Jude Kai, I think his name was. Yeah, Jude. He wanted me to write this sort of arrangement of this song, and I was sort of like, okay, cool. And I wrote it and sent it off, and we done some edits and stuff. And when I got the article back from the SA Bandsman, or what I think it was SA Bandsman that was in, you know, I'm looking at the name of list of composers, and there's Chris Brindley from Australia, obviously, but there's Roger Trigg, and there's, you know, all these guys, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, that's cool. So that was sort of an international credit, I guess, and then, which was cool. And then, I just started sending stuff into publications in Australia, and started attending the symposium, which we have here in Australia. So I've done a few of those now, and I think the first guest that I maybe remember from that might have been Andrew Blythe, I think, was over.
Yep, Andrew
and
Blythe.
Then, yeah, and he was great, you know, really good,
really nice man.
Resource wisdom. And then we had Bill Himes, which I couldn't get to the full symposium for that, but I got to some of the workshops. And then last year we had, we had Len Ballantyne. So, you know, imagine in a room, Len, Barry Gott, Brian Hogg, Ken Waterworth, and then Noel Jones. So that's sort of our resource bank. And then you've got a bunch of Australian composers around a table. Sam and I got separated because Sam apparently, well, Ken would probably, he said on an interview the other night, Sam can be a bit naughty. He won't mind me saying that. We've put us together, it's not a good mix. We're like the two schoolboys that should not sit next to each other.
Yes, I know the thing.
So, so they sort of separated us for a while. But, you know, there was a lot of guys there who compose for the Salvos in Australia, or at least have an interest in it. And some really good quality stuff was there. Jared Prolux was there with some of his stuff.
Yep.
You know, there's some really good quality in Australia, and it's a one chance for us to get together in that atmosphere to try and learn how to
pick
play.
the brains
You
of
know?
the experienced and sort of.
Yeah, and we have a scratch band. It's really cool. We have this scratch band that plays, and so we all sit and play, right? And we play each other's pieces of music, and we stand up and conduct. And I did a couple, and you know, like it's good to hear feedback from people in the band.
Yeah.
You know, it's really good to hear. You know, my
You
horn
don't mind
part
that
stinks.
then. You don't mind that. You did, because there's some goes, oh, the critics like, oh,
No,
don't tell me. Because the best criticism, the best sort of education is, you know, it can sound perfect on your computer and in your mind, but it's not until you put it on the stands and get that real
yeah.
like, energy is
I
where.
got two. Yeah, I got two super important lessons, life lessons. One was from Brian, and one was from Bill. Bill's was never take personally the criticism you get, because that music might not be used for what you intended it to be used for, but it will be used somewhere. So if someone doesn't like it or doesn't need it, don't
Yeah,
care. Don't get upset.
yeah.
The other one from Brian, which I thought was just gold, absolute gold, was with Sibelius. You know, put it on as a piano sound and listen to it back in piano sound on Sibelius, not the computer synthesized sound. Now, I use a plugin on my Sibelius, which is called, it's going to escape me now. There's a plugin you can buy, which is basically, it makes the sound a little bit more real. And I use east-west sounds as well on my synth for my DAW, for my workstation. But to put it on piano and have a listen to it, you know, there's a bit of an idea that if you play it on piano and it sounds good, it should sound good in a brass band or any band really, orchestra, whatever. So I do that. I reset the sounds to piano and I listen to it back. And when you hear that clangor, that, you know, what we call it, I don't know if you use that word in England, but clangor.
Oh yeah.
The terrible sound. You know, when you hear that clash, you got to at least look at it. Now, sometimes, and this is the jazz side of my writing coming. Sometimes I want that sound. Sometimes I want that clangor because it's color, it's dissonance. But most of the time in a brass band, you don't want to. Well, at least the Salvation Army band, you don't want a clangor because when you write, look, at least when I'm writing, I'm not writing with the idea of the staff band playing my pieces of music. I'm writing with the idea of the local core band being able to play and use my music. So I don't think a clangor is a good idea in a normal core band because of a number of factors. Most of the musicians aren't pro musicians in most cases. And at least in a normal core band, there's obviously exceptions. Like I think of Hendon and that in England, they sound like any good brass band to me. But you know, there's some local core bands where tuning is a big thing. Like if you can get a tuning note out of them in tune, that's like a miracle in itself. So you've got to then say, like, part of my thing is it's not about the tunefulness, it's about the spirituality of they're playing and how they play and why they're playing it and the emotion behind it. So you've got to write in a way that allows them to do that. And I'm lucky in a way now. I'm sort of attending our local town band a little bit, helping some guys out and doing some mentoring, I guess, for some of the young guys. And you know, they're by no means an A-grade band. They're a local community band, but they give me an idea of what it would sound like to have a core band at an all right level, a decent level. So when I take a piece of music in or when I'm playing with them, I'm really constantly listening to what's going on and some of the issues that they're having as musicians and sort of trying to imagine what that's like in a core environment. Because
how does that translate with an outside band? Because I mean, you get a lot of outside, and it's not an exclusive thing by any means, but you'll get a lot of outside band players will have originated in the YP band or in a Salvation Army band, but some are just literally, you know, dad was the cornet player in the town band, in the Corey band. So when you're taking what is essentially religious spiritual music to an outside band and you're saying, listen, I want to try and pick, this is for a Salvation Army band, would you necessarily have to stand back and say, this is the tune of St. Denio, this is the tune of such and such, or, you know, have to explain that there's a reason why, you know, what the harmony is, rather than just how fast can the cornets go and how fast can the trombones, you know, slide up and down and all that?
Mm.
I mean, you think of John Philip Sousa and people, people of that ilk, where it was more on the entertainment and the fastest and the experience rather than spirituality. Not, I mean, not all town bands do that, but I just wonder what the difference is when you're dealing with a religious band and a non-religious band.
We I don't know what it's like. I mean, around the world, I don't know what it's like, but I know in Australia, a lot of the bands start by playing out and when I say red tune books, I don't mean the new ones. Like, I'm talking about the old ones, the pre-blue ones. Which
curious, I've got one here.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think I've got one floating around as well.
Yeah, I've got one somewhere.
Yeah, they play out of those as warm-ups. Now, I sit in some of those rehearsals as a Salvationist, and I go, man, they don't really capture that hymn very well. They play it mechanically, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think you can always tell two things. You can tell the conductor who's been brought up in a salvo background, and the players who have been brought up in a salvo background by the way they approach the piece.
Yeah.
So I think there's a technical aspect they like. I think most bands will play most things in front of them. I remember watching a really interesting video with, now I'm going to get it wrong, so I always get it wrong. Whatever child's brother takes Black Dyke? Is it David? Yes, David.
Something like that, yeah.
Sorry, David, or whichever one it is. But he was Childs. Mr. Childs, that's right. Yeah, Professor Childs, I think it is. He was talking about Resurgam when they did it with the ISB, and so I think it's on the ISB. Maybe it's on the Eric Ball DVD anyway. And he was talking about the fact that they had to prepare themselves to not have the applause at the end. That breath moment.
Yeah.
And there's been a couple of moments in rehearsals where we've played a piece of music, which, like O Magnum Mysterium's one, where you sort of finish it and there's that sense of you need to breathe at the end. You need to actually go, and I think it's the way you approach that. I think at least when I go to take music into a band, usually they chuck a baton at me, which isn't always what I want. I love conducting, but sometimes you want to sit back and listen to someone else do it. And so I'm normally conducting, so I can sort of get that out of them by explaining what I want. And I think that's important. I guess my high school teaching thing is that when I'm working with a high school band or a young band, even a young youth band, you have to explain some of that stuff. You have to explain how to get the emotion out of the phrase, shape the phrase. So I guess that history of being able to learn that and teach that helps when you're delivering that to an outside band if you want to get that. I also sometimes just tell them to forget about that and play the dots because I want to hear how any band would play it if they didn't know the background of it. Score notes are really important because they tell you what you need to do.
Yeah.
But sometimes you want to hear, or sometimes I like to hear, especially outside bands, try and tackle salvo music and without that background. And what you hear is usually a wonderful technical performance. But then it opens up that dialogue of what is the music. And it doesn't matter what style that is. If you're playing swing, rock, jazz, full-on classical transcriptions or traditional brass band hymns or whatever it is, I think you develop an understanding of what it means by listening to other things in that style. So, so one of the big things I do in rehearsals is play something similar to what we're rehearsing on a recording. It might not be the whole thing, might be 30 seconds, a minute. But as a composer then, I do the same. If I'm going to write a swing brass band piece, well, I'd be stupid not to listen to Light Walk, or anything that Barry's written, for instance, or Sam, because that style for me rings true of the type of style that the brass band's used to in that. And I think for changing styles, and this is probably where Sam holds his own in this style at least, but, William Himes and Kerno and those guys do the same. They've slowly, I think, navigated the ship where they want it to go by the pieces they've written. And if you go back historically and look at those pieces, they weren't, whack in your face suddenly it's swing. It's evolved over time.
Yeah.
And so learning, I mean, Lightwalk was, for Barry was sort of out of left field, I guess, for a lot of bands. But that's probably the exception to the rule. A lot of, especially American bands, have grown up with jazz.
I said that to Barry is when I was in Woodbridge, I had my home court Woodbridge in the mid-'80s. They played Daniel a lot because they were preparing for what turned out to be the only major foreign tour they did to Holland. And I said to him, it was really interesting to look at his music. So he'd done things like Joyous Experience, and I think Gold Coast Temple was another one of his. I apologise if it's wrong, but it was kind of traditional. I felt like saying, you know what, I get the impression that these guys have said, right, Salvation Army, we're happy to write this kind of music, and we can write it effectively, and we can write it for the groups that can manage it and do it. So, but if you don't, if you don't like it, we'll just go, no, we'll have your music, because to turn down such talent and the fact that they want this music to be used, and it also turns a very old idea on its head. I mean, in the UK, we're pretty much fair with "Oh God, a Burning Cleansing Flame, Send the Fire."
Yeah.
Now, you go to somebody of my parents' generation, "Thou Christ, a burning cleansing flame, send the fire, send."
Yeah.
Whereas with you, "Oh God, a burning cleansing flame," completely different, same song.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that you have that. Technically, you're not just going, okay, we're just going to play hymn tune after hymn tune. We want to give it a new spin. We want to give it new magic. Now, before I want to try and get onto your two published pieces, because one's got score notes, the other one doesn't. So while I've got you in front of me, your Eastern Music Prelude of Risen, which is in the Noel Jones series, which, as far as I'm aware, is your first credited published Salvation Army piece from 2017. Plenty more to follow, I'm sure. I hope. What's the story behind Risen for those of us who want the introduction to the Don Mayne school of Salvation Army music?
Look, as you can see behind me on my picture, I live in a place where we have the most remarkable sunsets and the most remarkable sunrises. Australia's pretty flat, really, and where I'm from is really flat. Like, I can walk for 10 Ks and have a 2-meter incline. So it's pretty nice. But we have a dawn service every year, which overlooks our lock. I don't know if I'm sure you've got locks in England, but boats go through. Yeah. So we've got a lock system in Australia.
We're older than you, but we're not that antiquated.
Well, I don't know. I haven't been really in England much. I've spent 9 hours in an airport and 1 day in London.
I've never been to Australia, so
yeah, there you go. So anyway, there's a lock system in Australia, which the Chaffee brothers, who established Mildura and the surrounding areas, sort of set up, and so it overlooks the lock and the weir, and overlooks this park, which is now where we do park runs in Mildura, and it basically has an unobstructed view of the horizon. So we have our dawn service there most years for church on Easter Sunday. And I sort of just had this idea one day that that was a nice thing to write about. We always did Christ the Lord is risen today that morning, and we sort of wake up the people around the surrounding area with some trumpet or some cornet and brass stuff, and they're really good. They don't care. There's not a lot of houses there, but so that's sort of where it came about, and it sort of started as this fanfare, I guess, sort of thing.
Yep.
And it's one of those pieces that, a bit like the others, I guess, it took a little while to write. I had some ideas and put them down and sent them off to publications, and then they'd come back with some ideas, as you're first starting. And it was sort of, it didn't take long to write. It took probably 5 hours to just put it on the paper. And then lots of editing afterwards, obviously, but the ideas come pretty quick. And basically I wrote Risen and a couple of other things in the same weekend. Like, it was like just a weekend at home writing. It was the first time in a number of years I'd been home for Easter for the whole weekend. So that's sort of where it came from. And it was basically trying to give this premise of, Christ the Lord is risen today, hallelujah, that main theme, which comes across all over the place. And, at the time I didn't know it was a prelude. I just thought it was a piece of music. I didn't think about preludes and postludes and everything else. I just thought, oh, well, here's a piece of music.
Yeah.
And, they gave it a shot and they published it. And I actually haven't heard, apart from the demo, I haven't heard any bands put on YouTube or anything. But I don't really care for that. I don't mind if it's not put on YouTube. Is it, it's one of those pieces that I look back on now, and I think everyone's got a piece that they go, yeah, it's okay. But what it is. But yeah, that's basically the premise behind it. And it was really just a glorious homage to, Easter Sunday, watching a beautiful sunrise and singing the song. And it was scored for the Noel Jones series, which was, I guess it's like our Unity series in Australia, I suppose. And so that was a good introduction to that, to be able to learn how to write. And one of the things that we spoke about in the editing process and in that sort of early stages was, are you happy with what you've got? Is there anything you want to change? And, I was guided through that process. And it was such a new thing for me to go through that sort of publishing. And I guess that was published around the same time that our big band CD came out, the Testify album that we've got, which
I got yesterday.
Yeah, which you would have got yesterday. So all the songs on that, there's 6 arrangements of mine, and that was sort of around that same time. So, I remember just sending it off and thinking, if you want it, use it. If you don't. And yeah, it turned out to be a nice little number that gets picked up by people around the place.
Yeah. It's interesting because it really, as an Easter music, Risen is just a perfect title, because we have a lot of. It was a conversation I remember someone telling me once where they said that the kind of Easter music tends to focus a lot on the Easter Sunday part and the very kind of crucifixion-y part of Good Friday. Now, with the exception of Easter Glory, which, Condon does the whole thing to such eclectic mix, there was this, sort of bridge that, you start off with this melancholy, it's going to happen. I mean, I said in an interview once to a friend of mine who was writing a book, I said, the funny thing is, I know that he was writing about a real life experience where someone died. I said, it's a case of, the death is going to happen. So you've got to, how do you put a lovely ending on it? We don't have the ending. We have the beginning with Risen. And you just had that wonderful bridge. And I think I prefer Easter to Christmas, to be honest, because I think Christmas gets so flummoxed and we get so flavormed with everything to do with Christmas that Easter's almost overlooked. It's just, it's 3 days, then you've got Lent, and then you've got all the kind of the build up. The other one you've got is just last year's another lovely prelude of Our God and King. I can actually access the score notes for this, which is the Canticle of the Sun, worshipping their Creator, Almighty God. So, give us the authentic version. That's not the dry text version, but how did Our God and King start out before it became the wonderful prelude for the Arthur Gallagher series that it's ended up as?
So the fanfare start, that was actually written for something completely different. Like, I think it was literally written for a fanfare, like, something at the start of something. I have often in my sort of workspace, I have the tune book and I have the song book, obviously, because words are important. And I have a whole lot of arranging books sort of on my right of my computer. So I had sort of designed this fanfare thing just as a bit of a thing, an exercise, I guess. And that line ba ba da 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 was in my head, and then I just happened to be playing something on a recording, and heard like a French horn in a quintet thing play that da 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 da. I was like, oh, I know that song, and walked off and didn't think anything of it. And then later on came back to it and thought that might work in there. So just put it in, and then sort of decided in the middle that I wanted to go back to the traditional thing. And I originally original tune and harmony, and I wrote it originally I think in 4/4, like it was like the start. And then some conversations happened about it before it was even sent off to publishing and stuff, and it was like, well, I want it to sort of change into the traditional 3/2 thing that it does. And then so I sort of rescored it like that, and then that then developed into sort of more sustained and traditional harmony through some conversations with Brian about the strength of the sustained harmony and stuff in that piece. And then, yeah, it got to the point where once we got to publication editing and stuff, it was, again, more conversations and, because at that time, and I'll probably do it a little bit differently now, but I was just sending the music off to, say, Brian or Bill or whoever to check. And then both those pieces have sort of been pieces that I've sent off to go, hey, what do you think? And then it's transpired into being published. So, and there's been a couple of others that haven't been, and that's cool too. So it's sort of come out of that. And then just hearing it back on the recording, I was like, well, I'm really quite happy with that. And so, yeah, it became again, a prelude type thing. But I think there's definitely a development between Risen and Our God and King in the way that it's written and the sound that I'm going for. And I think for me, coming back into the brass band writing after having such a long distance from it, I had to relearn some of that stuff. It's like anything else. If you don't do it, I always say to kids at school in maths, when are we going to ever use maths? One day you're going to use algebra. Like, it's going to happen. If you're building or whatever. And so if you forget it, if you don't do it, you sort of lose it in a way. So that was sort of that genesis of that. And it became a bit of a conversation point in how I was writing and what I was doing. And, and Brian was great as a editor, as a person who was that critical person who, his thing was always to me, I'm not going to tell you it's wrong, but, sometimes you get that comment of, if you don't want to change it, it might not be published. And I go, okay. And I don't have a problem with changing stuff if it means it's better for the music, and better for the bands. And sometimes, like I was thinking before when you were saying about the styles and stuff, and I was talking about fear. I think back to some of the early brass band stuff that brass bands were happy to play in the Salvation Army. There is some serious lines in those, like Eric Ball pieces and that, which are difficult, really, really tough. Yeah. And for some reason, we have this thought process in our head that the traditional orchestral sort of brass band style is not as hard as swing or not as hard as rock. It's just the same. Like, if you get young guys who aren't used to playing semi-demi quavers, for instance, which are like 3 lines, they're gonna look at that piece of music that looks like someone's ran a roller over the music lines and go, I can't play that. Yet they can play rock and swing. So you've got to think the same thing. And I think it's the same with publishing. Sometimes you've got to look at it and go, have I overdone it? Have I got too many lines? And I know in Our God and King, there's a sort of an interplay with, say, soprano and euphonium, I think it is, in some of the parts. And originally that wasn't how it was written as far as the actual note values. I'd wrote something completely different. And hearing it back, even on Sibelius, I was like, could I play that if I had to play it?
Yeah.
Maybe, but it would take a fair amount of practice. So I changed it, and that's what you do. It's editing. So
you don't mind, having a piece of music, whether it's an arrangement or someone said, do you know what, I think that would work. I can hear that working as a brass band arrangement of a rock or a big band, jazz, and you bring it down, and they kind of, but we're going to have to drastically sort of change the pedestrian nature of it to fit the kind of traditional Salvation Army brass band sound, because obviously with the big band and the jazz, you've got a lot of big, loud, glorious sound, whereas you need to sort of bring it down to, hang on, this is supposed to be spiritual. We're not showing off here. It's not that kind of fireworky atmosphere. You know, yes, we can play a Salvation Army march that's trippy and happy and on parade, and, you know, yes, 11, I love the march. You know, and you look at some of Sam's pieces, he's not afraid to take some really old pieces and shove a firework in there to kind of keep people awake and say, look, we're not going to fall asleep to Repton again. You know, this is our God and King. He is risen. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
So
well, if you listen to the big band album is a classic example of all my anxiety on that is a jazz waltz that's up. It's about 160 beats a minute, you know. It Is Well is like 182 beats a minute. Like, they're both, like, It Is Well is one of my favourite hymns. The story behind it, the harmonic. I've just actually done an arrangement of it for brass band. Hopefully, you know, Monday it might get published. But, you know, I sort of, and it's very meditative. I like to look at the lyrics and write to the lyrics, write to the words of the song. But in the big band setting, we wanted It Is Well to be an up song because we wanted it to be a celebration of the trials of life being overcome. So what I love about the old hymns is they're structured harmonically excellently. Their melodies are usually beautiful by themselves. You can sing them without anything else. And the words are theologically right. Like, you know, especially in the army, like we're big on theological
we are indeed, yes.
integrity. So, you know, and I remember having conversations with guys that, like, I've got a whole lot of written stuff with words, again, that haven't been sent into anyone. And I was speaking to some guys in Melbourne, in our worship arts team about, you know, do you want to have a look at them? But even before I send them in, I'm actually reading stuff to go, you know, do these theologically make sense? Like, are they just words that I've put down, or they actually got some substance behind them? So you've got to check yourself. And I think, I guess to get back to your question.
I just apologise for interrupting, Don. I thought I was being banged from downstairs as well. I was trying to straighten my ear. I was not ignoring Don, but bearing in mind my family are in the house and we've got deliveries. I'm not ignoring you, Don. Please do not.
No,
I just want to make sure that that's understood.
No, look, I'll talk to the wall. It's all good.
No, you're not. You're talking to me. I'm listening to the differences.
Yeah. Getting back to your, I guess the question a little bit more directly is, no, I don't mind that things are changed and things are edited and changed for the better. I've grown up, and I guess, again, it's probably Bill's influence a little bit, but other guys as well at uni, and doing these shows where, you know, I can write the best piece of music possible for a show, a best arrangement. I think it's awesome. Sounds great. And then they go, yeah, but we need an extra 13 bars for a dance break. Well, 16 bars for a dance break, you know. Now, I have done one with 13. That's weird. But you've got to go, and you've got to go, okay. And now your ego might be, you know, hit a bit when you're going to go, well, I thought it sounded great. But I take the professional approach, which is, okay, I'm being employed in that case to do a job. I don't take it personally. So what I've done is transferred that to my salvo writing, where if someone is critiquing it, or if I've got it at a symposium, or if I've got it at wherever, I just take it on board and I go, okay, cool, thanks.
And
I try it. And
it's a life lesson that helps you. So the next time, you know, if someone comes up and says, oh, Don, you know, I'm really having trouble with this piece of music, you know, could you give us a look? And you're going, I know what's gone wrong here. I was in the exact same position. It's one of them, you know, it's one of my questions is, you know, the lessons you've learned in your music writing experience. You didn't start out as Mozart and everything's articulate. You know, someone comes along. I mean, I remember Sam said in his interview, and I think I read it, he said I think it was Hold the Fort. He was trying to do this funk version, and he had it in front of Bill Himes, and Bill immediately knew what he was trying to do. It's kind of, okay, you're there and you want to get there, and there's a reason why you're not meeting.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's those life lessons where you think, oh, is that what that is? And sometimes it's just, like you say, a fresh pair of eyes to go, yeah, I see what's going wrong. I know you're trying to do. Have you thought? It's like you're so intense in writing it. I'm guessing. I'm not a composer. This is why I'm asking you. You're sort of got that tunnel vision that it's that fresh pair of eyes going, yeah, you're so concentrated on getting from section C to section D on the cornet line you've got to pay attention to the trombone line.
Oh, definitely. And I think the thing is, you've got to, with Sibelius, for instance, I save everything as versions. So like there's a feature on Sibelius where you can change the version number. So version 1, version 2. So when I do an edit, I save it as a version, so I can go back and check stuff in the edits. And the other thing I use is the little sticky notes in Sibelius to communicate. So, if I send it to publications, they put the sticky note on saying, hey, have you thought about this? Have you done this? I then respond with that sticky note saying I've changed it or I haven't. So it's a bit of a communication thing. I've got all that saved in my cloud on my computer and also on local. So, I think you need to do that. And I think, you've got to accept, like if Bill Himes or, whoever, Kerno or Barry or Brian or, I don't know, John down the road, whatever, decides to take the time to tell me what they think of my piece of music, good or bad, I have to respect them enough to take the time to listen. Yeah. And my big thing about life, I guess, is it's okay to fail. And what I mean by fail is it's okay to sort of have that moment where you go, this isn't what I intended it to be like. Yeah. And that's where the critical mentorship, I guess, that I've had in my life with guys and also what I do now with people is to say, look, it's not really a failure, it's a lesson.
Yes.
And so, like guys, I've had some really interesting conversations with people where they go, I'm going to give up now as I'm not good at something. And I deal with it every day at school with teenagers, Mm-hmm. And I go, well, what's the lesson in this? Where do you go with this? And I have to model that in my own life, my own spiritual life. We all have moments where we fall apart, and I've definitely been there where I've hit the wall and thought, man, this is whatever. And then people come alongside you, and then from that the musical experience comes out. There's stuff that I've written in all of the styles that I write in and stuff, which will never be played publicly. It's not there for that. It's there as a journal for me or a benchmark of where my life was at the time. Yeah. So I think you have that style of music. Now, as time goes on and I feel comfortable with sharing that with people, I then may release it and do what I do with it. But I think you have those moments in life where that's important to have those experiences and have those conversations. Like a couple of years ago, like Sam and I are a perfect example. A couple of years ago, we didn't really speak much. We didn't really know each other. And, we speak most days now. And we chat and we joke and, rib each other when we can and stuff. But those conversations and those relationships are built out of a common ground. And that's, we have that friendship with a whole lot of guys, especially in Australia, where it's such a small community of composers, that we can have those discussions. And, the symposium's a perfect example. Like Noel, there's a funny Noel Jones story. We went, I love Noel Jones. We went to a cafe.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, went to a cafe. He wanted some food from a cafe because, we weren't enjoying the food at the place. And so a whole lot of us young guys, or younger guys, hung out with Noel at this cafe for morning tea, breakfast, Mm-hmm. And we just went, this is an amazing opportunity for us to not even ask questions, just sit with someone of his stature. Yeah. And then we got to see some of his personality and stuff. Yeah. We count those as honorable times and times that are really important. And I think, I look back on my life as a musician and as a composer. I've had some amazing opportunities with people across the world to do things. And some of them are least expected, I didn't expect to be on stage playing alongside whoever, or we do a Christmas gift concert every year, and every year it's cool to be able to play with Emma Pask out the front, or James Morrison a couple of years ago, whatever it is. You go, where are we? But those moments are special, and when you look at them that way, you then realise that they're all learning experiences, and they're all experiences you can draw on to write, to develop the craft.
So bearing in mind that the part of this initiative was a lockdown, has this meant that it's forced you, you're not gigging, you're not playing out, you're not meeting the audiences, you're not rehearsing, and you're not interacting with the students to maybe the levels you used to? Has that meant that the ability to sit down and have time to think and concentrate on music has sort of gone away, or have you been able to access that time to be able to finish off some stuff and try some new stuff and just sort of dabble? Which way has it gone for you?
Definitely the dabble. Being a secondary school teacher, we had a lockdown enforced on us the last week of term 1. So we sent the students home early and spent the rest of the week at work planning for what we thought was going to be holidays. And then a week in, we were told, no, you're going to work from home. So the original plan was 10 weeks at home or 11 weeks at home teaching, which for me, for the first 8 of those, was every day, 8:30 in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon, sitting in front of a computer, doing online lessons, planning, assessing, all that sort of stuff. And we sort of spent the night then either writing new material for classes, or for me it was writing more material, marking, and then doing some music. So I haven't stopped. And then slowly we lost a whole lot of gigs as a performer early. And the idea was that at least Australia, we were flattening this curve and we were doing really well. Unfortunately, in the state I live in, we've had, which doesn't sound like a lot, but we had 75 cases last night, overnight. Now, Melbourne, where it's sort of the hotspot, is about 4.5 million people. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but in Australia, we've not had the devastation that other parts of the world have had. So, it's a big, serious thing for us. So I spent the 2 weeks of holidays pretty much sitting at home. Like I didn't go out at all. I tended to my bonsai that I grow and wrote music for 2 weeks and played and recorded. And I've done a whole lot of online projects, different things. But I took it as an opportunity to reset. And I've got a list of things on my computer that I'm slowly ticking off, arrangements and compositions and stuff. But look, it's been a different time. I had said at the start of 2020, I might take 2020 and slow down a bit. I did not expect to slow down this much.
Anyone did.
No, and in some ways, I'm really seeing it as a blessing. I'm seeing it as an opportunity for me to sit back and meditate on what's going on and be a positive influence to those around me. I care for my community, and luckily for us in my community at least, we've had minimal cases, but being a bit isolated allows us to be like that. But at the moment, I can't visit my friends in South Australia without isolating for 14 days. That's tough. All my good mates in Adelaide that I'd normally these holidays go over and see, I can't do that. So, I've definitely got to use every major platform of online video conferencing. And so whoever owns shares in those companies are probably doing really well. But it's a new world, and I've been teaching. So I privately teach some trumpet as well. I've been teaching online. It's just a different challenge, and you've got to embrace it as a positive challenge. And I don't know if the world will ever be back to what it was, and that might not be such a bad thing, to be honest. It might be good to reset.
If this was kind of not a lockdown, and once you've got the teaching and the trumpet and the composing out of the way, is there room in your life for other interests? What else do you have the time to do anything other than trumpet music and composing and big band and gigging and driving 400 million squillion miles every day?
Yeah, I did 33,000 Ks last year in my car, so that was it's a lot. Look, I do. I live by, as I said before, I live by the river. I love to walk and hike. It may not look like it in photos, but I love to hike. I did a May challenge for MS, multiple sclerosis, with some work colleagues, and I knocked out 160 Ks or something in a month. So I sort of walk and do that. I love fishing, even though I'm not good at it. My mate and I, we go fishing and golf. I like playing some golf. Again, not good at it, but it's for me, it's about connecting with my friends. Like, they know I'm really busy, and I know I'm really busy, and sometimes too busy. So we actually, part of my schedule is that I schedule in time now for catch ups with my mates, and I make it intentional. The phone goes off, or at least silent, and if we're having dinner, it's in my pocket, and I really enjoy those times. So I'm a bit of a foodie. I love good food. I love traveling. I love sitting watching stars in the sky and astronomy, and
You
I
got
have a whole lot
perfect
of
weather in
interest.
Australia, haven't you? I mean,
Well, where I live is we have a fair amount of sunlight, obviously, through the day, but we have clear, beautiful skies, and it goes back to that flat Earth again. Well, not flat Earth. I'm not one of those, but the flat horizon where you can see the Milky Way, Australia's southern Milky Way, as clear as anything. And so I'm in a really fortunate spot where I can go out, 15 minutes out of town, and I've got a ute, Australian, ute. So I just sit in the back of that or lay in the back of that, and I can look straight up in the sky and see some astronomically beautiful things from the universe. And it always reminds me of the Howard Davies song, Wonder of His Grace.
Yeah.
And so I often,
then the stars
when
that
I'm,
reach eternity.
I often just lay back and look up and think of those words and think, man, we live in an amazing universe that God created, So.
Well, I'm going to sort of let you get on with your day. It's nearly 6 o'clock in the morning now. But I will pray with you if you don't mind.
Yeah, not a problem at all.
We'll go from there. But I just want to say thank you so much for being awake at such an extraordinary hour and being willing to talk music composition, your experiences. Particularly, I think what comes out is you're keen to learn from your critiques, and you're not afraid to say, if it doesn't work, let's go back and find out why not, rather than and if it's no good, I'll just dump it in the ground. You don't want to lose anything. You want to save it, and sometimes that will come in useful in the future. So thank you very much for joining in this collection, and for
no, my pleasure. It's an absolute humbling experience to look at the list of people and be added to it. So
I'll have to recount because I keep losing count of how many. Somebody will have to tell me how many I've done now. There's at least 4 more in the pipeline. For every one I do, 3 more pop up. So I'm just gonna pray with you. As you wish, dance about, sound your head, whatever comes comfortable. But dear Lord, the privilege of music, of love of music, of the study of music, of the composition of music is something that I think a lot of people we take for granted because we're so exposed to radio, YouTube, Spotify. Unlike our ancestors and our great grandparents, we've got music coming at us from all different directions, and sometimes we forget that it takes time and it takes effort to want to do it properly. And sometimes the fun stuff can take a very short space of time, and sometimes it's agony. But we know, Lord, that you are at the center of it, and we thank you, Lord, that through all the trials and the tribulations, that we are trying to make sure that the message that you want is going through it. Sometimes it's not clear from the start, in the middle, but we hope that it's usable. And I just thank you, Lord, that Don has really embraced this, and he's had this wonderful technical training through college, through university, and he's not afraid to try new things. He's not afraid, as the quote from Norman Beercroft, he was not afraid to be dangerous if he thought it was the benefit of the kingdom. So I thank you for his training, his knowledge, his love for you, his willingness to experiment, his willingness to adapt himself to the needs of the people. Sometimes it might be an alien experience, sometimes it must be the most normal everyday experience, but we are not afraid, we are not ashamed of the gospel, and sometimes that says go out and do it, but you will always equip us. And I thank you, Lord, that you have equipped Don for this music, that he celebrates the risen Lord, he celebrates the the God and King that you are, and that they are only just a mere microcosm of his enormous talent and musical output that's just waiting to get out there. And that the criticism and that the reformulation and the making it into the God mode that sometimes has to happen, that he is not afraid to say, thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord, for just being there. We thank you, Lord, for the talent, for the time, the effort. I pray for him and his family and his friends. I pray particularly for the friendship of the Composers Forums that he's mentioned, that wonderful source of encouragement and criticism and person building. When we don't all come out fully formed, Lord, he's still learning lessons. He's recognizing that there are lessons that he may not have even thought of yet, but they will make him a better person. And it's for you, Lord. And I just thank him for his witness, his Christianity, his faith in you, the people he interacts with at school and college, that will see, as I say, you know, have faith in God, you know, look full in his wonderful face, to see the beauty of Jesus, to be like Jesus is a central core of his being, and that he's not afraid to say, yes, I am a Christian and this is why I write. And I thank you, Lord, that he has taken this on board and he is well versed in it and is able to use his experience and his training and his education to further the cause for the kingdom. And I just pray for all the people that he comes in contact with, and the people that have been blessed that he doesn't even know about, Lord. And that the emails that he will get saying, we played Argon King, we played Risen, thank you so much for writing. It really was a blessing. And for all those pieces yet to come, Lord. And for many pieces that may be sitting on the shelf behind him, that he's going to get that spiritual nudge in the back, get it published, get it sent off. It's got to be used. I don't want it sitting on yourself. I want it in the Christian world. So I thank you, Lord, for the opportunities, for the blessings, for the encouragement, for the equipping, and just for you, Lord, in his life. And I just pray for him now, particularly in these circumstances. You'll keep him safe, you'll keep him well, you'll keep his friends and his family safe and well, and that before too long, he will be able to get out and just enjoy and benefit from the life that you have prepared for him, for the singing, the dancing, the music making, the fishing, the walking, the hiking, the being with people, the connecting with people, to do what he loves to do, knowing that you're at the center of it and you're behind it. All this, Lord, I place in your hands, and I ask your blessings on him and your love on him right now. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Right, I will